It's Friday, so let's answer some questions from the listeners.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can also catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. We got about 20 or so questions to get into, and for those that are unfamiliar, if it's your first episode where you've ever tuned into our show, you can always send questions to us on YouTube, or you can send them on Twitter. Best way to do that, just look for the most recent YouTube video, respond with your question. I'll get the notification. And if you want to do so on Twitter, about every Thursday evening of the week, I put out a tweet. Just respond with your question there, or you can direct message me. I believe the way it is, if I don't follow you, which I can't follow everybody, but I just need to approve it, but I still get the notification, and pretty much every single time I see a question, I approve it. So if you want to do it that way, you absolutely can send me questions through direct messaging. But we're going to kick things off with questions beginning on YouTube. This one comes from Elizabeth. What are your thoughts of grabbing Jeff Hoffman for the bullpen arm? It looked like he had a solid last year. It would definitely help out our bullpen to have a solid arm besides Ursig. Hopefully Harvey can have a bounce back year as well. Well, the report coming out of Hoffman's camp over the last week or so is that he's looking for a deal similar to what Clay Holmes got, and Clay Holmes is being tried as a starter this year. So whether that means, Hoffman wants to be a starter, he's clearly wanting starter money. I think that prices out the Royals for this situation. I think it'd be phenomenal to have Jeff Hoffman in the bullpen, but if the Royals are going to give out a expensive deal, I would have a very hard time believing that it's going to be somebody in the bullpen. I think if they're going to do that, it'll be for that middle of the order bat. If they aren't able to acquire that player via trade, which I still feel very confident that the Royals are going to be able to add another middle of the order bat. They're going to add a role player, and I'd imagine they'll add a swing starter along with some bullpen depth there. But if you're wondering about the bullpen depth, I don't think somebody like a Hoffman will be, in the Royals' crosshairs. I think the Royals will probably stay away from somebody that's wanting a 3-year deal that's north of $30 million. So, unfortunately, I do not see Jeff Hoffman coming to Kansas City. Next one comes from Giovanni. What about bringing Mike Moustakas back as the left-handed hitting third baseman? Well, I think Moose is having a good time on Hosmer's podcast. I think there's certainly nostalgia there, but the Royals will be looking for somebody that's a little bit younger and has more years of control than Mike Moustakas. But hey, that is my favorite Royal of the 2014 and 15 teams. And even before that, I always had a soft spot in rooting for Mike Moustakas. And I think he had his time in returning to Kansas City. He came back in 2018 for a little bit. But no, I don't see the Royals going after him as that left-handed hitting third baseman. This one comes from, looks like, do we have any more here on YouTube? Yes, we have one from John. Is there a minor league player in the organization that can be the middle of the order bat? Well, I do think the organization is pretty confident in Jack Caglione at some point being that guy, but I would also say that they're going to take their time with Jack Caglione. As for the middle of the order bat by opening day, no, I don't think there's anybody in the minor league system that fits that mold. But I do think down the road, maybe hopefully toward the end of the year, Jack Caglione could be somebody that helps out that lineup, but I'm still kind of anticipating that he gets there in 2026 and not at some point in 2025. I think they'll take their time and be more patient with Caglione when it comes to working his way through the minor league level. So I'm going to say no on that. I do not believe that somebody at the minor league level could be that middle of the order bat answer. This one comes from Twitter and from Aiden. With the Tigers reportedly having strong interest in Alex Bregman and Santander, who do you think the Royals can counter with? It would be tough for the Royals to counter with somebody that's comparable to Bregman or Santander. I mean, I think Detroit and Kansas City have a different expectation as to how they're going to get their big piece for the lineup. I think the Tigers are willing to spend a lot of money to go out there and get Bregman. And I think if that falls through, they're going to turn to Anthony Santander. Does one player transform their lineup? Or are they one guy away? I think they might be a piece or two away. To me, it might come down to health a little bit more with the Tigers because I think Riley Green is phenomenal. I think Torkelson can get there. I think Colt Keith can obviously get there. Parker Meadows was phenomenal. Does a Santander move the needle? I think a little bit, but Bregman certainly would. I think having Bregman in that infield with Colt Keith and Gleyber Torres, even a guy like McKinstry, I think could be very good for that team. I do think they are one big-time piece away from really making that lineup pretty scary, whereas the Royals, I think they want to go through the trade route, which is why we've seen them be so patient, so delicate when it comes to evaluating the trade market. I don't think they're going to be jumping the gun, and I don't think they want a stopgap guy. I think they want somebody they could count on for this year and the year after that, and you're not going to be able to get that on a whim. You know, you're not going to be able to acquire a guy with 2 extra years of control at the snap of a finger. So I think the Royals are being a little bit more patient, and when it comes to countering with that, I don't think that's what the Royals are going to try to do. I don't think they'll see somebody like Detroit make a move and go, well, we need to have somebody that could offset that deal where it feels like, you know, we still have the better lineup, because I think the Royals have different strengths than the Detroit Tigers do. But if they're going to go all in for Bregman or Santander, I don't see the Royals going all in through free agency for somebody else. I still think they really want to acquire a player through trade. That could be Taylor Ward. Maybe that could be a JJ Bleday. Who really knows? I know that we had the news the other day where Josh Rojas was signed by the White Sox. That came as a little bit of a surprise because I thought the Royals would really be a good fit for him. But clearly the Royals did not want to give him the deal the White Sox did, which I can't imagine was that expensive. But still a good question there coming from Aiden. Lucas asked, are they aware free agency started? Look, I know the Royals are being a little bit patient there, and I can certainly share the frustration a little bit. It's not as fun as it was this last offseason. I mean, from a podcasting standpoint, I far more preferred last offseason than this one, because other than the Michael Wacha deal and the Jonathan India trade, it's been radio silent. I mean, there has been basically no moves made from the Royals, but I do think they're in a different position they were last year. And I know we've said this before, but you know, the Royals had to replace a lot of pieces last year. This year, not so much. So I think they feel like they could be a little bit more patient. Other than the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Mets and the Red Sox, I would say, the rest of baseball has been pretty slow in making moves. I think that every other team out there is trying to wait out the market. They're waiting for the player side to jump a little bit. And even though there's been some movement, some traction, some of those guys are tough negotiators. And for the Royals, I think they're going to try to get a swing starter. I think they're going to try to get a role player and a bullpen depth piece through free agency. But as for that middle of the order bat, I stay pretty strong in believing that it's going to be through trade. I don't know what they have exactly to offer, what they're willing to offer. But, you know, I would say by February, right before pitchers and catchers report, if there's no move by then, I think I could absolutely jump in with that complete and utter frustration that they have not done much this offseason. Next one comes from Eli. With the WBC coming up soon, would the Royals let Wacha, Reagans, Lugo, or Ursig pitch in it, considering they would be in a competitive window? Number 2, could trading for me either now or at the deadline bring in the bat that they want to and bring up Jensen, MJ back to catcher during spring training? I don't think MJ is going to move back to being a catcher. I think that he's going to be a permanent outfielder They like the strides that he's made. They feel he's athletic enough to be a average to above average left fielder. I don't see them going back to him being a catcher. And as for Carter Jensen, like Caglione, I don't think they're going to rush him, right? I don't think also if they bring up Carter Jensen, it's to be the backup to Salvador Perez. I think when Carter Jensen gets to Kansas City, it will be to be the everyday starter. And that would mean that Salvador Perez is no longer catching every single game for the Royals. He's no longer in the lineup every single day. I think the Royals understand they can play that a little bit slower because they've got options right now in Salvador Perez and Freddie Fermin. And as a backup catcher, look, Freddie could be a starter somewhere else, but I do believe that, he is somebody that unless there was a ridiculous deal that was being put on the table, I think they'd rather hang on to him as the backup catcher. They love the value that he has. And since they're in their competitive window, I think they feel like he's a really big part of that team and their ability to make it back to the postseason. And the last question there with the WBC, I mean, they've never really limited those guys. I think that most of baseball, if you get asked to go compete in the WBC for Team USA or whatever team, you let him go. I mean, that's a huge honor no matter which country they'd be playing for. So for guys like Reagans or Lugo or Waka or Ursig, if they got the nod, if they got the invitation, I think they would let him go. And you don't really worry about them getting hurt over there. It's a big, big deal to a lot of players over there. So I don't think being in a competitive window would hinder their chances at all or persuade the Royals one way or another to let him play or not. Okay, let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, still a lot of questions to get to next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor and our title sponsor today in FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I know you can love on betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. You know that it's absolutely thrilling. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. For my pick, I will stay with the NFL. I will look to that Steelers and Bengals game. I'm going to go with the over on receiving yards for George Pickens. Big time game for him. I think he's due for a bounce back. I'll take him to have the over in receiving yards against that Cincinnati Bengals defense. Next question from Twitter comes from Anthony. If we add another bat, who would you go after? Do we need another starter or will we go with Alec Marsh or Kyle Wright as our number 5? Or will there be more bullpen help? As for the bat, I'm still not sold that they're done trying to make a play for Taylor Ward. I think they could try to come up with the resources to get that deal done. I am curious if they're still interested in somebody like Brett Beatty, banking on him to be a bounce back guy, a change of scenery for him. I wonder if that's somebody that they could view as the middle of the order bat. I'm not sold he would be because that would count on him bouncing back. And I think they want to bring in somebody who's very consistent, who has, a lot of experience at the big league level. And he's somebody you're not having to worry about what type of production he'll give you. You feel pretty good about what he could give you. I think Alec Boehm is out of consideration at this point. I think he's too expensive. So until there's more smoke around one player, I'll probably stick to just in the past who they've been linked to, Taylor Ward being one of those guys. I think a pipe dream would be like a Luis Robert or a JJ Bleday. I know it was BR Walkoff the other day that put together like a hypothetical trade, and it was Carter Jensen and Ben Kudrna for Luis Robert. Would that be enough? I really don't know because the White Sox are a rival in the division. Would they want to do that in trading with Kansas City? It feels unlikely to me. So there's a lot of options they could go after out there. But to me, until we get a little bit more smoke to that, I'm just not sold on one guy. I think there's a lot of options, but none of them so far feel like there's a lot of smoke to it. I do absolutely believe they're going to pick up a swing starter. I absolutely believe they're going to get some bullpen depth, both those through free agency. I could see somebody like a Michael Lorenzen being in that deal. Kyle Gibson, I think, is another one who was in St. Louis last year, a swing starter bullpen help. That could certainly work out. Lance Lynn's another name, pitched against the Royals for years when he was in Minnesota, when he was with the White Sox. He's been around the block, and I do think he'd be somebody as a sixth starter, as a long reliever that you could get for pretty cheap. And as for the bullpen help, there's so many names out there. There's still a lot of great relievers out there that could make a lot of sense for the Royals. My favorite, I think, for price and what role he could fit, I think David Robertson would be perfect. Kirby Yates or Kenley Jansen would be another one that you could plug into the back end of the bullpen, move Ursig to like the 7th or the 8th inning role. Those are a couple names there I think that would make a lot of sense there. But a good question there coming from Anthony. Tom asked, does Yoan Moncada make any sense if they're going to go sign a cheap utility type guy rather than sign someone who could possibly have the upside? I will be honest with you, Tom, that I do think Yoan Moncada over the last month or so has really grown on me. I think if he stays healthy, you are really getting some good upside in somebody. Switch hitter, we know he's put it together for a full season before, but last year, he's surrounded by a terrible baseball team. I understand the lack of motivation for returning when you're coming back to a team that was 30 and 100 and something. Like it just never seemed that enticing to Yoan Moncada, and I feel like he was due for a change of scenery. I think he needs to go somewhere where he could play on a competitive team again, and the Royals could be one of those options. I mean, they're looking for a left-handed hitting third baseman. He's a switch hitter, but he plays third base. I think he could do it pretty well. I absolutely would be interested in kind of a bounce-back deal there, and I think he'd fit just nicely into that lineup, and the power is certainly there to be a middle-of-the-order bat. There would be questions about, the drive and the passion, but I think getting around a winning ball club again would certainly impact some of those things. So I'm with you there. I'd be all for it in a bounce back deal. It's really grown on me over the last month. RB Carr asked, Royals are looking for a swingman type. Jeff Hoffman reportedly wants to start again, but have been dominant as a reliever the last 2 years. Would you consider giving him a similar deal as the one to the Mets gave Clay Holmes, or is that too much to gamble? I don't think it'd be too much to gamble. Jeff Hoffman, I believe, could make that transition. It's going to be something, too, that we see a lot in Major League Baseball over the next few years, that a lot of relievers look to kind of what Seth Lugo did and say, I've done it as a setup guy. I've done it as a 7th inning guy. I feel like I can start. I just need to stretch out my arm a little bit, and I can get paid starter money. When it comes to Hoffman, though, it also comes down to, do the Royals think there's a spot open in the rotation? Right now, I don't think they believe that. I think they have their top 3 guys in Reagans, Lugo, and Waka. I think they believe Chris Bubich can be a 4, and then Alec Marsh or Kyle Wright could be the number 5. The swing starter type will be somebody they can get on a 1-year deal, less than $10 million a year, probably less than $5 million if they were really being hopeful on it. Hoffman's going to get a pretty expensive deal. I think whether he becomes a reliever again or he becomes a starter, he's going to be looking for a 3-year deal around $35 to $40 million. And that's something I don't believe the Royals are going to be willing to do for one pitcher that, would fill the number 6 spot in their rotation. I think they would much rather go after somebody they can give a 1-year deal and barely a little bit of money attached to it. And then if they need to count on them for a spot start, they could certainly do that. Blaze's question is, how likely is it that the Royals sign a guy like Jurickson Profar? Also, what do you think of Jesus Sanchez as a trade target? I would love Jesus Sanchez as a trade target. I don't know if I would be sold on him being the middle of the order answer, because I think there's a lot of swing and miss there, and the Royals need high OBP guys. They need somebody that can really be a key cog in the middle of the order, and that feels like you're rolling the dice big time with Jesus Sanchez. And I do think you'd have to give up maybe a little bit more than you wanted to if you tried the trade for Jesus Sanchez. And then as for Profar, I think that he is a good target. I think that if he were to sign with the Royals, you wouldn't really hear me bash the deal. But I do think there is some serious concern as to if he can repeat what he did last year and how much of it was being in a loaded lineup like San Diego's. I mean, when he was in Colorado and when he was in some other places toward the middle portion of his career, he didn't play that well. There were some legitimate struggles. And last year, he burst onto the scene again. And I have to wonder if that was being surrounded by a lot of great hitters in that lineup. And for him, he might be waiting for San Diego to give him another offer. And since the Padres have been so quiet, I'd imagine they still have a lot of money in the tank to go get Jurickson Profar. So right now, I'd put it at less than 10% the Royals get Profar, unless that price drops a lot. And then when it comes down to, I think the other question, Jesus Sanchez, I'd still put that at kind of the same spot, under 10%. I would love to know if they're interested in somebody like him, but he feels a little bit like a Brett Beatty, where you're banking on the upside, the potential that he has, and not so much feeling as confident about the player they are right now. If everything works out and everything clicks, you got a pretty damn good ball player. But if things don't work out and they don't click, you might have given up a lot to get somebody that's very replaceable in the middle part of your order. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll wrap it all up this week with our final questions on a Mailbag Friday. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Our last sponsor of the week is going to be Gametime, and right now you got a lot of things you can go to. There's a lot of football going on, both in college football and the NFL. We're wrapping up the regular season in the NFL, as we told you on FanDuel. The college football playoffs now down to the semifinals. So you got the championship coming up. Baseball spring training is next month, so you can start jumping on that, buying tickets, going out to games out in Surprise, or maybe you start looking at the regular season. But if you're thinking about buying tickets, do so over at Gametime, whether you're going by yourself, group of people, one other person. Gametime is where it's at. I turn on my notifications so I know when some ticket prices are dropping, when you can see some of the new bands coming in town, when there's a new comic coming in town. It's going to have you covered. Those notifications are going to be great for you. But buying tickets, make it easy on yourself. Go over to Gametime. It's a great app to use. So just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is Gametime. Our last set of questions begins with Bryce. What comes next? A trade, a signing, an extension? When should we expect the news? It's tough to kind of pinpoint when the next breaking news story is going to happen. I would like to say within the next 3 weeks, we could be expecting something, just because I believe the market's going to heat back up again. But I'll go a free agent signing. I think that's the easiest thing to go with. I think it could be either a swing starter or a role player or a bullpen piece. Maybe it'll take a little bit longer to get that middle of the order bat, but I do think it could be easier to get one of those deals done in January, just so you're not scrambling for 3 or 4 pieces by the time pitchers and catchers are reporting. So my guess will be in the next 3 weeks, we'll see at least one free agent move happen for the Royals. Charles asks, what is making Eric Pena struggle so much? And if he shows improvements in 2025, would you still be optimistic about him as a prospect? It's a great question, and we haven't been asked about Eric Pena in quite some time. Here's the thing with those lottery ticket kids. We can hear all about the comparisons. We can love the profile, the ceiling, the potential. We can love all of that. But at the end of the day, these are kids. I mean, these are 14 and 15-year-old kids that we are drawing comparisons to. We think they can make that jump. And oftentimes, it just doesn't work out. It's an absolute dart throw. And with Eric Pena, I remember he got compared to Carlos Beltran, and I think that would have been premature at the time, and I think it's still pretty premature. But at some point, a guy he kind of reaches his prospect status, or kind of goes past it, if you will. And I think Eric Pena is at that point where he's been in the minor league level a long time, and we just really haven't seen the jump. So hopefully there could be some improvement, but until he cuts down the swing and miss, I don't think you could ever really consider him to be a big-time prospect anymore. I think that ship has pretty much sailed. And if he can get to, AAA at some point, I would love to eat my words. But at this point, going into 2025, I'm just not considering him a prospect anymore. But to your question, if he improves, it's got to be cutting down on the swing and miss. I really don't care about the home run totals, the RBI totals, or the batting average. If he's striking out 35, 40% of the time in high A or low A, that's not too much of a prospect to me. Jason's question is, if you got to pick between Cole Reagans and Vinny Pasquantino, who would you give a contract extension to? I'm going to go Reagans, because I think that Reagans is that key number one piece to your rotation for the next handful of years. And I think getting a deal done with him would go a long way with the fan base of making sure you're building around him for your rotation, because I think he's somebody you want to keep into that starting rotation for, the next 3, 4, 5 years in Kansas City. So, I'm going to go with Reagans over Vinny. Marty's question is, if Salvi has a big regression this season, do you see the Royals not picking up his option? I think it'd have to be a pretty big regression. I think if he goes out there and he hits, 240 with 20 home runs and 75 RBIs. Like they're not going to decline that option. I think it would take him having by far and away his worst season. He's not durable. You feel like Carter Jensen or Blake Mitchell could make that next big jump, but it would take some pretty severe regression for the Royals to decline that option. And I don't think he's going to regress that badly. I mean, every single year we're going, this is probably it, the year that Salvi has that big regression, and it never comes. Eventually it's going to happen, but I still think that he's got a year or two left before that regression really starts to happen, where you start to consider, is he even worth putting in the lineup every single day anymore? And for 2025, I think he's still going to be good enough to keep in that lineup every single day. Kate's question is, what was your favorite underrated moment last year? I'm glad I was able to put this out there on Twitter, and you can always follow me at JohnnyJ_15. I think it was that go-ahead 2-run home run in Anaheim where Adam Frazier had it. That one to me gets swept under the rug because it was Adam Frazier. That's as simple as I can put it. You had that moment in Seattle. You have some of the playoff moments. You have that final series on the road against Washington where they absolutely had to have it. There were some good moments in that Braves series. There was a handful of good moments against the Twins when they came back against that great bullpen. I think that was in September, if I'm not mistaken. There were some great moments this year. That one back in May gets swept under the rug. Like, that was a few days after the Royals had that ninth inning collapse. I was actually there at Kauffman against the Brewers. Willie Adames, who now just signed with the Giants, had a go-ahead home run into the bullpen in left field off James MacArthur. They had 2 outs and I think nobody on at that point in time, up by 2, absolutely collapsed. And a few days later in Anaheim, Adam Frazier, with the Royals down 1-0, parks a 2-run home run right over the wall in right field. Dugout exploded. Felt like a big moment in that point of the season to get them really going. And as we know, a little bit later on in May, they got to a season best 14 games over 500. So I do think that home run had a little bit to do with it, them going on a bit of a surge, and was very fitting for the type of year they had, where kind of felt a little 2014 like, where just when you think they're down and out, they come through with a big moment. And on that night, it was Adam Frazier's big moment. Waka offseason asked, what do you think a Reagan's extension would look like? Definitely see him and Bobby's the future of this franchise together, in my opinion. I agree. I think they view him as the pitcher of the future, and they view Bobby as the player of the future. As for what a deal would look like, I would probably say that you're getting in the ballpark of 20 to 25 million a year. Might be looking at like a 3 or 4 year deal. So the way that would map it out, let's say if it's 3 years, you're going like 3 years, 75 million. Maybe if you're going like 4 years, 22 million a year. What would that map out to? I'm terrible at math. Somebody else can do it that's smarter than me in the comments and think what 4 years, 22 million a year would be. I think that's what it would be probably like. I think that he's somebody that's worth just over 20 million a year. And if he puts together another great season, maybe it's getting closer to 25, 26 million, which is why I think doing an extension maybe before the season starts would be a good decision. I know there's concerns about the injury history. To me, I'm just not going to live in fear like that, where the Tommy John surgery, where they said it was 2, I go over this all the time. It was 1 Tommy John surgery, didn't heal properly. And therefore they say, well, there was 2 Tommy John surgeries. He had the 1. Tommy John surgery does happen for pitchers, but now you've had basically back-to-back years of a clean bill of health. Like, if you get to year 3 and you're going, well, he had Tommy John 2 years ago, don't want to give him that extension, then I think you're just living in fear when it comes to dealing with extensions. Like, injuries happen in baseball. They happen all the time. I don't think that should prevent you from giving out deals to players that you believe are really, really good. And Cole Reagans, to me, is a damn good baseball player, a damn good pitcher, and worth a 3-year extension or 4-year extension in Kansas City, because he's a top 10 pitcher in all of baseball right now. And I really do believe that he is somebody that you need to lock up long term. I think that would go, again, a long way with the fan base, as I brought up a little bit earlier before. Last question we're going to get to here comes from Samuel. Any scenario where the Royals would sign Trevor Bauer? I don't think so. I think that he has thrown his last pitch in Major League Baseball. You know, the Royals aren't the only team that's not really that interested. I think at this point, you start to, look at how many years it's been since he last pitched in the big league level. And, some of the numbers in other countries, other leagues, I wouldn't read into him too much. I believe the league he was pitching in this past year, like 40-plus-year-old Robinson Cano was hitting 400-plus. So that's not really the best example of competition. So I just think at this point, he's nearing his mid-30s, if not already there. And nobody in baseball really seems to be that interested. And I don't think it's completely about the incident. Certainly has something to do with it. But I think also teams are chalking it up to it's been a while since he's pitched at the big league level. Not really worth the PR headache if you go out there and give him a deal. Even if he doesn't want to pitch on the league minimum, I think it might come down to just they don't want to shake up the clubhouse too much. And maybe they don't believe he's that great of a pitcher anymore, considering he hasn't pitched in the big leagues now in a handful of years. So right now, I'm going to put it in a pretty hard no. The Royals are not going to give Trevor Bauer a deal before 2025. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be off this weekend. Supposed to be a snowstorm in Kansas City, so if any breaking news happens, I'll be here and able to do an episode, but we'll probably just be back to normal on Monday because I don't envision a move happening here in the next 2 days or so. But until Monday, you take it easy, Kansas City.